Good evening, and welcome to Trinity Lutheran Church. My name is Greg Derwart, and it's a real honor to be with you this evening. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm coming to you live from our sanctuary here in Joppa, Maryland, as we continue to deal with the realities of social distancing and quarantines and Wi-Fi strength in our homes. And we felt that it was perfect timing to talk about our goal mapping process. And this is something that we've talked about before in other programs like Trinity Talk Live. And, I heard someone mention earlier this week, with the world, what's going on, it feels like God has sent us to our room to think about what we've done. And I don't know if that's true or not, but the fact that we are all mostly home, unless you're those folks on the front line helping with things on the front line. It seems like I'm noticing a lot of people are becoming reflective because they're being given an opportunity to be more reflective and think about what may be going on in their lives and their plans for the future, short term, whether it's will there be a graduation ceremony in a couple weeks, or will there be a passion play later this summer, or things long-term down the line. So we were talking here at the church about putting together this special program. It sounds like one of those after-school specials. So this is a special program talking about the next step goal mapping process. And this is a process that I've created over many years, fine-tuned it over the years, and have walked friends and family through this process at different points in time in their lives. And we felt that it would be a wonderful opportunity to talk to you about this process in case you want to consider the possibility of doing this for yourself or with your family. So for those of you that are watching live on YouTube, and if you have a YouTube subscription, you do have the ability to type in questions as we go along. So as we go through this 5-step process, feel free to chime in with questions. And my friendly voice, Mary Kay, can let me know what your question is, and we can answer it in real time. And if you're watching a recording of this down the line, I'll be sharing my contact information with you at the end of the program, and would be happy to follow up with you at another time. But let's get into it. When I talk to folks about goal planning, I use the symbolism of a map. We all use a GPS system to go from one place to the other. Those of us that are old enough may remember using those maps that folded up and never perfectly got back into your glove box. But coming up with goals and a strategic plan for your life is just like using a map. It's getting to a specific strategic location in the future. So, but before we start mapping out actual goals, let's take advantage of this time that we have maybe to be contemplative and reflective and think about who we are as individuals. So that's step one, talking about what are you made of? And let's go through several different things here. One thing that we talk about is clarifying and identifying what your values are. And when we talk about trying to come up with or affirm what your values are, I usually suggest to people to think about how you are when you're at your best. What you like about yourself when you're at your best, or what do you admire most about your best friends. Those are usually the things that are your governing values, the things that are important to you. So I would suggest, as you go through that thought process and think about what your values are, come up with a list of 5 or 6 or even 8 values that are important to you, and write them down, and we'll refer back to those later. Another thing that can be important is to clarify and identify what roles you play in your life. I know that I am a husband, I am a father, I am a son, I am a business professional, I'm a volunteer. Whatever those roles that you play in your life that are important to you, let's clarify those and put those down in writing. Make a list of what those roles are. Another thing that can be important and helpful in this process, in defining what you're made of, is identify what your passions are. You know, what things get you excited and juiced up to, you know, if you have something on your to-do list and you can't wait to do it, you know, what are those passions, the things that you love to do? Because when we get to the point of identifying what our goals are, if we don't have them aligned with these values and these roles and these passions, you're never going to accomplish those goals. So that's why I'm asking you to think about going through these steps and identifying them. So values are important, roles are important, your passions. And then another thing that can be helpful is identifying and thinking back certain life experiences that have helped to define you. You know, think about your childhood. You know, were you brought up and raised by loving and nurturing parents? Have you been blessed with mentors? Maybe you haven't, and it's okay to be candid about that. It's a part of how you've been made as a person. So just affirming those and identifying life experiences can be helpful as we go along as well. Other things that can be important and helpful is thinking about different skills. One thing that I have done in the business world with some of my team members is to put them through an exercise called the Unique Abilities Assessment. But anyone, it doesn't have to be in a business setting. This can be helpful for anyone. So what you would do for this exercise would be to draw 4 squares on a piece of paper. You know, four squares, and in the top left square, list the things that you're really good at and you love to do. And then in the top right square, come up with a list of the things that you're pretty good at and you like to do. And then in the bottom left, the third square, come up with the things that maybe you can take them or leave them. You're not really crazy about them. You're adequate at doing those things. And then the bottom right square, list the things that not only do you hate to do them, but you're not good at them. And then obviously once you go through that exercise, go back to that first square, you know, the things that you love to do and you're really good at. Those are going to be things that you want to make sure that you do more often, because if you align your goals with your talents and your skills, you're more than likely, you're going to have a better chance of accomplishing those goals. And then a couple other things just from a personality standpoint. It can be fun and valuable to just acknowledge your personality traits. You know, are you an introvert? Are you an enthusiastic and optimistic person? Are you an obedient, law-abiding person? You know, what are the different personality traits? Another thing that can be fun and interesting to think about. My family and I were talking about recently, are you left-brained or right-brained? If you're left-brained, I believe that's when you thrive on structure and want to be organized. And then those of us who are right-brained, not us, but those of you who are right-brained may be more creative. So going through all of these, it's like a 360 assessment. You know, you're asking yourself these questions, and you're being honest and transparent and candid with yourself. And once you have that's when we can move to step 2. And that step 2 is essentially, what is your purpose? And so I hope you understand now that it's important to go through that step 1 first, because that'll make it easier for you to come up with a mission statement or a purpose statement. There's also many resources available to us. The Purpose-Driven Life, written by Rick Warren, is helpful when you're trying to think about what God's purpose is for you, for your life. And that's the other thing that to keep in mind as we think about our purpose. We can have all of these ideas in our head, but the best thing to do and the most important thing to do as you think about your purpose and your mission is to, number 1, be in the Word, the Word of God, and to pray to God, and just give yourself time of prayer. God has a plan for us already, and it's up to us through this process to bring clarity as to what God's purpose is for our life. But when we talk about a mission statement or a purpose statement, I usually suggest that it be not long, maybe 1 or 2 sentences, something that can be easily memorized, because you'll want to refer back to it on a regular basis, and we'll get to that later on. Other people, instead of you creating a full 1 or 2 sentence statement, they may just come up with a single word. There's a book called The Life Word, where they go through the process of helping you figure out what your one word is that defines who you are, which sounds kind of exciting or daunting, depending the way you look at it, but that can be valuable as well. So I would suggest that you do one or the other or both, a purpose statement or a life word, and that will in turn take us to step 3, which is, what is your vision? And some people often interchange the words mission and vision. The way I like to differentiate between the two is, your mission is your purpose. Your vision is what you aspire to be. Like if you think about the best case scenario of what life would look like for you at some point in the future, that's your vision. And that's something that you're aspiring to, you're shooting towards. And some people come up with a singular vision statement. I actually have come up with multiple vision statements based on the different goal categories that I've created. So when we get to step 4, when we talk about what our goals are, I'm going to suggest that you break your goals into different categories based on the different things that are important to you. Now, so remember, when we go back and talk about your roles and your values, this can help you come up with what goal categories you want to create. So, for example, I use categories of faith, family, career, wealth, health, knowledge or continuous education, and community and friends. Those just happen to be the goals that I have in the categories that I have created. But feel free to come up with any categories that are meaningful to you. And then I would also say, even though many of us go through this process ourselves, if you are married, it could be useful and appropriate and valuable to come up with some of these categories together. If you have a family category or a faith category, it might be valuable for your husband and wife to do that together. So once you've created those categories, I would suggest coming up with a clarifying vision statement for each of those categories. And again, it can just be a single 1 or 2 sentence statement, and it's meant to be the perfect scenario of what this category is going to look like for you in the future. And again, this will be helpful down the line as you go through a weekly and daily fine-tuning, and we'll get to that later, and it'll basically roll into affirmations, envisioning, and putting that successful vision in your mind as you go through your day and your week. So once you come up with those vision statements, now it's time to move on to step 4, which is what are your goals? And when I talk to folks about goals, again, I suggest that you come up with goals for each of these categories that you've created. And I suggest that you start with long-term goals, then we'll hit mid-range, and then short-term. One of my favorite resources is Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and one of his principles is begin with the end in mind. And that's why we talk about the purpose and the visions, and then we talk about long-term goals. We do that first before we pare down to the short-term goals. And so when I talk about long-term goals, I usually suggest looking at least 5, maybe 10 or more years out in the future, and coming up with 1 or 2 goals, long-term goals for each of those categories. And I suggest making them as specific as possible so they can be measurable, they can be realistic, and that'll make it easier for you to then pare down to the mid-range goals, and again, come up with mid-range goals for each of those categories. Mid-range goals, I usually try to pinpoint maybe 3 to 5 years out in the future. And again, make them specific, due dates, realistic, measurable. And the sole purpose of those mid-range goals are to be stepping stones to help you accomplish those long-term goals. And then once you've done that, then we can go down to the short-term goals. And for me, I usually make those 12-month or calendar year goals. Some people, we've talked before about if you're a student or your life is centered around a school schedule. Some people go through this process in August or September and come up with 12-month goals that run maybe from August to July or from September to August, lined up with a school year. But I've always done it setting up 12-month goals, mapping them out in December, and planning them for the calendar year. And again, come up with 3 or 4 goals for each of those categories. And the main purpose of those short-term goals are to be stepping stones to accomplish those mid-range goals. And that's how it just perpetuates and just continues from there. So once we've come up with those goals, we're not done. We often hear about strategic plans just collecting dust on a shelf. You've gone through this process. Now it's time to implement your plan. So that's where we get to step 5 and talking about what is your process. And when we talk about a process, not only do you go through an annual process of updating your 12-month goals for the coming year, but then you want to keep these things front of mind on a regular basis. So one suggestion is to set aside some time once a week. I set aside some time on Sunday, usually a Sunday evening, and I go back and look at the previous week and think about the things that I accomplished. Check off the things that I accomplished. Think about what went well, and then maybe think about what could have gone even better. And then think about what I can do for the coming week to help inch my way towards those 12-month goals. So I'll read through those 12-month goals to remind myself of what those goals are, and then I'll try to incorporate some of those things into my plan for the week. And that way you're helping to keep those things front of mind. And then on a daily basis, we can fine-tune it that much more. We can set aside some time every morning. If you're a morning person, you can do it when you wake up in the morning. You may have a morning routine where you're getting a cup of coffee, doing a devotional, maybe doing some exercises or some studying. And you can also take a look at your goals and the things that you've mapped out for the week. You can read through those vision statements and remind yourself of those vision statements. That way you're putting in your mind that perfect scenario of the future, because the subconscious mind doesn't understand the difference between reality and fantasy. So if you continue to feed your brain with these positive, affirming ideas, you're much more likely to achieve those things. Another thing that I have found that can be helpful on a daily and weekly basis is I read a book this year called High Performance Habits by Brendan Bouchard, and he comes up with 6 things that high performers do on a regular basis. He includes clarity, which is knowing what your why is and that you're living intentionally. He talks about energy. Are you managing your mental and physical energy well? Do you have a sense of necessity? Do you feel like it's necessary to be at your best? Are you being productive? Are you working on things that matter most to you? And after you've gone through this process, it should be clear what matters most to you. He talks about influence. Are you guiding or leading or treating others well? And do you have a sense of courage? Are you sharing your real self? Are you being transparent? Sharing your thoughts and feelings. So that's another thing you can do from a reflective standpoint on a daily or weekly basis. Ask yourself, are you doing those things? So that's the process, and the key moving forward is to have those stepping stones and document and celebrate the things that you have accomplished, and then make sure that every year you update those short-term goals. I should also say, when you go back and look back at these big picture things back at the beginning, your values and your mission statement and your vision statements, those things, generally speaking, will not change from year to year. Those things should remain constant because they're in line with your values and the things that you have affirmed that are important to you. But your goals can change. That's okay. Don't feel bad if life happens and circumstances change and you need to adjust your long-term goals. That's fine. It's good that you do that as circumstances change, so that you're continuing to, deal with reality. So, but every year, go through your short-term goals and celebrate the things that you've accomplished, and then use those accomplishments to think about what you need to do for the coming 12 months. Again, that would be a stepping stone to get you one step closer to those mid-range goals. So I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Well, Bill Schaefer says, "This is what I'm made of: snips and snails and puppy dog tails."
What took you so long, Bill, to figure that out?
And Cindy Henderson says hi.
Fantastic. Hello to you both. Well, like I said, if anyone has any questions in the future, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to share my contact information with you here on the screen. And I should mention this as well. It's helpful to go through this process with someone, whether it's your spouse or a coach or an advisor, because sometimes it's difficult to be transparent and honest with ourselves. And if you have someone that asks these questions to you, they may help flesh these things out with you. So I'm offering myself to do that with you all. Especially during this period of time when folks are home, you may be teleworking or you may be laid off. It's a perfect opportunity to set some time aside and go through this process now. So feel free to reach out to me, and I would be happy to schedule a time for a phone call or a Zoom call on an evening or a Saturday and walk you through this process. And if there aren't any more questions?
No questions. Bill Schaefer put an icon on there, and we can't figure out what it is.
Okay. I'm happy to follow up with Bill to figure out what he's talking about. But listen, thanks so much, everyone, for joining me this evening. It's a joy to share this information. Oh, we do have a question.
Yes, Cindy Henderson. I'm sorry. How long have you been following this track?
Okay, great question. So I would say that the first time I went through some iteration of this process was over 25 years ago, close to 30 years ago, right after I got out of college. But the process, I have definitely fine-tuned it over the years. But what's really cool is, so obviously, 25 years ago, I came up with 10-year goals. And I still have copies of all those goals that I created for myself. And it's amazing how many I've actually accomplished. And I'm not saying that to be braggadocious, but the point is, the more often you document those things, and as long as you're heading towards something, even if you don't accomplish all of them, if you accomplish half of them, that's still things that maybe you wouldn't have accomplished if you didn't put them in writing and headed towards something. So thanks for the question. Any other questions? That's great. Well, feel free, folks, to follow up with me. Like I said, with my contact information. And listen, everyone stay safe. God bless you all. And thanks again for joining me tonight.